Hey guys, this is 4J3 and today we are building background job system for sending email. But what is a background job? Let us consider a server with the few operations that it can do like authentication, APIs to manage those authentication, then a database connection to read and write user data, and some monitoring APIs in order to monitor the health of our server. Now, if we take a closer look at the authentication flow, we can see that we have our client app through which the user can send their email and password to a server. Now, the server has to do following steps in order to authenticate the user. The very first step is hashes the password. So a server hashes the password because we cannot save the password directly to the database. That'd be a crime. After hashing, the server saves the details to our database. Now, the third step is generating a JWT token, which the server sends back to the client in order to authenticate a user. Now, it's all right till here, but then you decide to send an email to the user on the email address in order to verify it. Now, this particular task is what we can term as a background job. Background jobs are generally tasks that run asynchronously outside of the main request response lifecycle. Now, these background jobs help offload time-consuming tasks like sending emails, in our case, also resizing images, etc. This basically makes our app stay fast and responsive. So let's get back to our server, and then we can term this sending email task as a job. Now, we've got a job, but who can we delegate this task to do? There comes in worker. Now, this worker is nothing but a piece of code which actually sends the email for us. This is where event-driven architecture comes in. The server emits events on user registration, the worker reacts to them, and this makes the system modular and reactive. Now, along with event-driven architecture, we also introduced distributed system architecture because we have separated our concerns. We have decoupled the worker and the server. So this way, we actually can scale these both these modules independently, and also the overloading on the server can be avoided if we decided to keep the worker on the main server. Now, in order to communicate, in order to have a common point of connection between our server and worker, there comes in our in-memory database. You can think of it as a real-life redis. So let us talk about this in-memory database. So this in-memory database works with the help of queue. Now, queue is actually a data structure, but it has this special power. It kind of looks like this, like an array, but the special power of the queue is it takes an input from one end and emits output from the other. You can think of queue as same as a line in Starbucks cafe. So the very first person at the very front gets their drink first, whereas the person behind them has to wait until the first person has finished. So this is the same concept that is followed here, as in we have different queues for different jobs. So these queues are formed within our database, and then for particular job there is a different queue. So these jobs, as the events are emitted for a particular job, they keep getting appended in the queue while the worker takes the job one by one from this queue and executes them. So similar thing we're going to do here. We are going to have we have a job that is sending email to users. We are going to create a queue. We can name it send email, and then the server will write this job in our database, and the worker is gonna pull that job from the database and is going to execute it independently, asynchronously. Okay, so this was all about the architecture. Now let us consider what real life technologies we're going to use in order to pull this off. So we have a server, which is an express server, and then we have the worker node as bullmq. So this is a nodejs library that we are going to use. And then we have a redis database, and then for sending email, this is our job, right? Now it's time to code. So let's get into our code editor. We have an empty directory here. I'm going to initialize this directory using npm init y command. Now we have a package.json file. I'll open the code editor vim, and if we look at the file tree, we have just one file here. So now I'm going to start writing our server. I'm going to create a server.js file. In order to start, we need express module. So I'll go to my terminal and I'll ask npm to please install express for me. Along with the express, I'm also going to install bullmq that we're going to use to create our queue. While this installs, let's get back to our package.json file and make a few changes in it. So we are going to add a script here by the name serve in order to run our server. Also here I'm using nodemon in order to run my server. So I'll also install nodemon. I'll install nodemon as a dev dependency. So this will keep rerunning the scripts when I save the file. Let's get back to our code. And in here, we're going to start by pulling express into our code. So require express. Then we are going to create a server variable and we're going to initialize it with express function. Now we are going to start our server by server.listen, and in here we have to pass in a port and a callback function. So this callback function is going to include a log that's just gonna say that server is running at port 5000. Along with this, I'll also create a API for the base route. It's going to be server.get base route, and our callback function is going to have this request response arguments, and in here inside the function body we're going to write s status to 200, and we are going to send a JSON object with a message server online. Perfect. Let us try running our server npm run serve, and we're going to make a get request to this particular URL localhost 5000, and here we have our JSON message server online. Now let us get back to our code and start building our authentication route. So this is going to be a post request at the endpoint API/auth/register, and our callback function is going to include request response as arguments, and the function body is going to have, so what is the very first thing that we have to do? We have to pull out email and password from the requested body. So I'll ask email and password to destructure from request.body object. Now, since I'm using request.body, I'll have to include, I'm going to send JSON. So I'll have to use this express.json middleware. This will help us pass the JSON object that we're going to send with our request. So just after we have received our email and password, we have to do a couple of things that we discussed. The very first thing that our server does right after receiving email password, it hashes the password, right? So we're going to hash our password, then it saves the data to database, then it generates a JWT token. Perfect. Now the fourth step. The fourth step was sending email. So for this task, we will have to create a queue. So I'll ask for a queue from inside of our bullmq module, and then we're going to create our queue. So I'm just going to call it queue for short. And so queue is just a class. So we are going to create a new object queue, and inside here we have to pass the name as a string, so the name of our queue. So we are going to call it email queue, and this is important. Make sure you keep this name unique because we're going to use the same name at the worker side as well. So now right after here we will have to ask our queue to add a job, and we have to define the name of our job. So send email. That is our job, and along with the name we have to specify a payload as well. So payload is going to be our email address. Now this returns a promise, so we have to prefix it with await, and since we're using await, we'll have to prefix this function with async. Perfect, that is fine. And now since we are using async await, let us also include try catch to catch any errors in case. So I'm going to move this down, and right after sending email, what you need to do is send them a status 201, as we just created a resource. And inside the JSON, we're going to send in message, and this message is going to be loud and clear: user registered. Perfect. You don't know how to spell, right? So user registered. In case of an error, just say s.status 500 along with a message. This is going to be a generic message. We do not want client to know what is going on inside of a server. So it's going to be internal server error. Perfect. Looking great. Now let us go back to our file directory, and inside here let us create worker.js. So this file is going to act as a server that handles all the workers. So worker, and before implementing the code, let me also go to the package.json and create a new script for our worker. So I'm going to call it work, short for worker, huh? And then the node mod is going to serve this file for us, worker.js. Perfect. Let's get back to worker.js, and in here we are actually going to implement the code for our worker. So let's pull the worker from our bullmq. So we'll ask bullmq to please give us worker. Okay, we have our worker. Now we're going to create this worker. So we're going to call it email worker, email worker. And then since it is a class as well, this is an object, it's a new worker, and this worker takes in, we're going to pass 3 arguments in here. So first one is a string, is the name of the queue. So if you guys remember, the name of the queue was email queue. Pretty understandable, right? And the second argument is actually a callback function. So this is supposed to be an asynchronous callback function, and it takes job as an argument. And then right after this callback, we have to pass another object that includes connection variable. And this connection is actually connection to Redis database. So let us quickly install Redis module as well. So I'll install two new modules actually, npm IO Redis for talking with our Redis server, and then resend for sending emails to our users. Now, for running this, you should have a Redis installed onto your system. So you can go to Redis website and you can install Redis for your system. I can show you that my system has running Redis. I'll use sudo systemctl status Redis, and you see active and running. Perfect. I'll close it and let us create a connection for Redis. So I'll say Redis. I'll ask Redis to come down from the IO Redis module. So I'll say Redis, please require IO Redis. Great. And in here, this requires a object from us. So we have to set this variable max retries per request to null. Let me check the spelling. Yeah, fine. And so let us start writing this callback function. So I'll use try catch in here. And in the try, what we're going to do, we're going to send an email, right? So first of all, let us pull the email payload from our job. So we are going to destructure our job and we're going to pull out email from job.data. Now we have an email address that we passed into the queue, and now we're going to ask resend. Okay. Before that, we need to connect to a resend, right? I'm going to call it resend, and I'm going to say new resend. So we are actually creating a new resend object. I'm going to include resend from resend. So lots of resends here. Require resend. Perfect. And this takes in an API key as a string. So what I'm thinking is creating a .env file. And in here, I'm going to write API key variable. We need an API key. So let's go back. Let's go to Redis. Sorry, let's go to recent. And in here, let us create an API key. And I'm going to call it email job. Let's add this. So this is going to create an API key for us. Let's copy this API key, go back to our code, paste it here, save it, go back to worker.js. And since it requires key as a string, so I'll put a backticks here. And in here, I'll put process.env API underscore key. So we have our API key here. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is make a few changes to a package.json file to include .env file into the script. So I'm gonna ask node1 to use env file as .env. Great. Let's go back to our worker code, and in here, I'm going to ask resend to send emails to, here we have to set a few variables. So the very first thing that you need to set is from. So who is sending this email? Now resend provides you with a testing email that you can use in order to test your resend framework. So this is the email address, onboarding@resend.dev. And you can use this email to send email to only to your email address through which you created an account on resend. So in here, we'll pass in the payload. And then we have a subject here. The subject is email verification, because that's what the purpose is. We want the user to get verified. Okay. And then we pass an HTML. And this is just basic HTML, your design, what you want. So the HTML, so we're just going to write please verify, please. Okay. Oh, missing a comma here. Fine. Actually, recent also returns uh, something. So we're going to take that as response. We're going to call it response. And we're going to log this response and see what it is. And in case of any error, just log the error for me, please. So just log the error. Perfect. We have saved it. Let me check my code. Yep. And let us try to run this. Let's see if it's working or not. So I'm going to run npm run work. Okay, it's fine. It's running. Let me make a authentication request, post request to an API endpoint. So it was local host 45000 slash API slash auth slash register. And since we are passing JSON, we have to apply the header content type application slash JSON. And now our data. So our JSON data is going to be email and password. So email and email here, I'll have to use my original email that I used to register to resend. And the password is going to be the safest password in the world, 123456. Actually, I missed .com here. Now, when I press enter, let's see what happens. We have received a message. User registered, and in the queue, we've also received a message from a worker. Error is null, and we've received an ID. And if I go back to my recent dashboard, let me go to the emails and let's see. So we have got this email less than a minute ago. Yep, this is our email. Let's check. Please verify. Yeah. So this was the email that we just sent. So you see how easily we create our server and then a worker, and we asked our worker to perform this particular task. You can create more workers for different jobs, and for each job there is going to be a different queue, there is going to be different payload, and you could also have different connections for different workers. But remember, the job has to be in the same redis database. Moving on, you can try implementing the authentication features as well. So this was a short tutorial on how you can create your own background service for sending emails. You can use this same methodology in for other different jobs as well. You just have to identify which tasks you can delegate as a background job. And feel free to like this video and write down any comments. If you have any queries, please put them down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you for joining.